I wasn't supposed to hear them. That Sunday afternoon, I had gone upstairs for a nap after our family lunch, but remembered I'd left my reading glasses in the kitchen. As I approached the doorway, my son Robert's voice drifted down the hallway. She forgot to pay her electric bill last month. Caroline. That's the third time this year. She's missed a payment for something. I know. My daughter replied, her voice lowered but still audible in the quiet house. And did you notice she put the milk in the pantry instead of the refrigerator? Today I found it when I was clearing the table. I froze my hand on the doorframe, suddenly not wanting to be seen. Mom's getting forgetful. Robert continued his finance executive voice, shifting into what I recognized as his problem-solving tone. We should control her finances before she makes a serious mistake. Caroline's response chilled me to the bone. I've been looking into it. There's a legal process for establishing guardianship based on diminished capacity. We'd need documentation from her doctor, but given the signs we're seeing. Do you think it would be contested? She's always been so independent. My daughter sighed. That's why we need to do this now, while she's still somewhat aware, but before she has the wherewithal to fight it. Once we have financial control, we can make better decisions about the house, her investments. The beach property, Robert added almost too quietly for me to hear. Exactly. It's sitting there empty most of the year, an unnecessary expense and liability. She'd never sell it voluntarily. Too many memories with Dad. Which is precisely why we need to take action. For her own good. I backed away silently, my heart pounding in my chest. My forgotten reading glasses, no longer important, making my way up the stairs with a care I'd never needed before. I shut my bedroom door and sat on the edge of my bed, hands trembling. For her own good. How many atrocities throughout history had been committed under that sanctimonious banner? My name is Victoria Hamilton. I am 72 years old, a widow for 5 years. And until this moment, I had believed I was respected by my children. I spent 38 years as a psychology professor at Westfield University, specializing in cognitive development across the lifespan. The irony that my own offspring were now plotting to declare me cognitively impaired was not lost on me. Yes, I had forgotten to pay the electric bill. The automatic payment had been declined because my credit card expired and the replacement card was delayed in the mail. Yes, I sometimes misplaced items as I had throughout my life, even in my 30s when I was juggling a full professorship research obligations and 2 active children. And yes, today I had absent-mindedly put the milk in the pantry while my mind was on the upcoming faculty retirement dinner. I was helping to organize. These were normal lapses, not signs of dementia. But my children, my educated, supposedly loving children, had jumped straight to the most alarming conclusion. And worse, they were actively planning to use it against me. I looked around my bedroom, a space I had shared with my husband Harold for 43 years before lung cancer took him. The house had been our first major purchase, bought when Robert was just a toddler, and I was pregnant with Caroline. Over the decades, we had renovated, expanded, and made it truly ours. The beach property they mentioned so dismissively was our retirement dream, purchased the year before Harold's diagnosis. Everything I heard indicated that my children saw these not as my home and my meaningful investment, but as assets to be liquidated, financial resources to be redirected. But why Robert was a CFO at a mid-sized tech company? Caroline had a thriving real estate business. They weren't desperate for money. Unless they were. I realized with a start that I knew very little about their current financial situations. Robert had gone through an acrimonious divorce 2 years ago, and Caroline was always talking about expanding her business. Had financial pressures made them see their mother as a potential source of capital? That night after they had both left with overly solicitous hugs and promises to check in more often, I sat at my computer and did something I had never considered before. I searched How to Prevent Children from Taking Control of Elderly Parent Finances. The results were eye-opening and disturbing. Apparently, financial elder abuse within families was far more common than I had realized. Adults taking advantage of parents' cognitive decline, manipulating them into changing wills, establishing power of attorney under false pretenses, even gaslighting them into believing they were less competent than they actually were. I thought of all the little comments over the past few months. Robert, asking if I needed help balancing my checkbook, something I had done meticulously for decades. Caroline suggesting I might be more comfortable in a community setting rather than rattling around in this big house alone. The frequent exchanges of glances between them when I took an extra moment to recall a name or date. Had they been laying groundwork? Creating a narrative of decline that could later be leveraged in court. The very idea made me sick to my stomach, but my academic training kicked in. I needed more information before drawing conclusions. I needed evidence, not just suspicion. The next morning, I called Emma Lewis, my closest friend since graduate school, and a retired attorney who had specialized in family law. Can we meet for coffee today? I asked, careful to keep my voice casual in case my paranoia was making me imagine conspiracy where there was only concern. There's something I'd like your perspective on. 2 hours later, we sat in a quiet corner of Blackbird Cafe, and I recounted what I had overheard. Emma's expression darkened as I spoke. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Victoria, I wish I could say I'm shocked, but I've seen this pattern before. Adult children get concerned sometimes legitimately, sometimes not, and rather than having an honest conversation with their parent, they go straight to legal control. But why I've never given them reason to worry about my financial judgment. Harold and I were always careful planners. Emma sighed. It's rarely just about concern. There's often an element of self-interest, whether conscious or not. Your estate is substantial, isn't it? I nodded. Besides the house, the beach property, and my university pension, Harold had left sizable investment accounts and a life insurance policy. We had always lived modestly, despite having comfortable resources. And how much do Robert and Caroline know about your finances? They know the broad strokes, but not the details. Harold always handled the investments, and after he died, I took over. Without much difficulty, I've never discussed specific numbers with them. Which means they may be estimating your worth based on visible assets and possibly overestimating what they stand to inherit. Emma took a thoughtful sip of her latte. The most important question is, are you actually experiencing cognitive decline that would warrant intervention? I shook my head firmly. Absolutely not. Normal age-related changes. Yes, occasional forgetfulness. Yes, but nothing that impairs my ability to manage my life or my finances. Then you need to get that documented immediately. See your doctor for a cognitive assessment. Get it on record that you're competent, and then we need to take steps to protect you. Over the next week, I did exactly that. Dr. Marcus Chen, who had been my physician for 15 years, was appalled at the suggestion that I might be experiencing significant cognitive decline. You're one of my sharpest patients of any age, Victoria, he said after completing a standard cognitive assessment, which I passed with flying colors. I'd be happy to provide documentation to that effect if you're concerned about someone questioning your capacity. I'd appreciate that, I replied, not mentioning who exactly might be doing the questioning. It's better to be prepared. Armed with Dr. Chen's official letter, I returned to Emma for the next phase of our plan. You have several options, she explained in her apartment legal pad at the ready as if she were back in practice. The most aggressive would be to confront them directly with what you overheard and the medical evidence countering their claims. I shook my head. That would irreparably damage our relationship. Despite this betrayal, they're still my children. I want to correct the situation, not destroy our family. Then the alternative is more subtle. You need to demonstrate your competence while protecting your assets in ways they can't easily challenge. Over the following month, I implemented a multifaceted plan that Emma helped me devise. First, I underwent a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation, with a specialist unconnected to Dr. Chen providing a second independent verification of my cognitive health. Second, I met with Harrison Walsh, an elder law attorney Emma recommended, who helped me create an irrevocable trust for the bulk of my assets. The trust included specific provisions about how and when my children could benefit, with stringent requirements for any changes. I remained the primary trustee, with Emma as the successor. Trustee, should I truly become incapacitated in the future. Third, I began keeping meticulous records of every conversation with Robert and Caroline, noting any comments that suggested they were exaggerating or misrepresenting my cognitive status. I even purchased a small digital recorder to keep in my pocket during their visits. Fourth, I systematically began handling complex financial transactions, rebalancing my investment portfolio, making strategic charitable donations, refinancing the beach house mortgage at a better rate, all while maintaining impeccable records that demonstrated financial acumen. And finally, perhaps most deviously, I left a fake diary in my desk drawer where Robert had been snooping. Yes, I had noticed the displaced papers and slightly ajar drawers. The diary contained entries discussing my plans to donate the majority of my estate to the university for a psychology scholarship fund, leaving only nominal amounts to my children, who have successful careers of their own. I was ready for the inevitable confrontation, which came more quickly than I expected. It was Robert who called, his voice tight with forced casualness. "Mom, Caroline and I were thinking of coming over this Sunday. There are some things we'd like to discuss with you." "Oh, what things?" I asked innocently. "Just family matters, planning for the future, nothing to worry about." "How thoughtful, I'll make lunch." That Sunday, I prepared a roast chicken, Harold's favorite and a meal I had made hundreds of times over the decades. As I set the table with my best china and crystal water glasses, deliberately choosing items that required careful handling, another demonstration of my dexterity and attention to detail, I felt surprisingly calm. My children were about to show me who they truly were, and I was prepared to respond in kind. They arrived together, Robert clutching a manila folder that I suspected contained guardianship paperwork, Caroline carrying a bouquet of lilies as if we were at a funeral. Their expressions were a mixture of determination and false cheerfulness. "Mom, you shouldn't have gone to all this trouble," Caroline said, surveying the elegant table setting. "It's no trouble to prepare a nice meal for my children," I replied smoothly. "I do it all the time for the faculty dinners I organize." A quick glance passed between them. There it was again, that conspiratorial look that now made me bristle. We made small talk through the meal, though I noticed they both declined the wine. I offered. They wanted to ensure their faculties were sharp, no doubt. As I served coffee and apple pie also made from scratch that morning, Robert finally cleared his throat. "Mom, Caroline and I have been talking and we're concerned about you living here alone." I widened my eyes innocently. "Oh, why is that?" "Well," Caroline jumped in, "we've noticed you've been a bit forgetful lately. The unpaid bills misplacing things. And the house is so large for one person to maintain," Robert added. "We worry about you managing everything by yourself as you age." I took a deliberate sip of my coffee, then set the cup down precisely on its saucer. "How interesting that you're bringing this up now. I've been doing quite a bit of thinking about the future myself." They exchanged another glance, this one wary. "I've actually made some significant financial decisions recently," I continued. "Would you like to hear about them?" "Of course," Robert said quickly, leaning forward. Instead of responding immediately, I stood and went to the sideboard, where I had placed a leather portfolio. Returning to the table, I removed several documents and laid them neatly before me. "First, I want to share these with you." I slid across the neuropsychological evaluations, I recently underwent comprehensive cognitive testing with 2 separate specialists. As you can see, I scored in the 90th percentile for my age group in all categories of memory, executive function, and decision-making capacity. Their expressions froze somewhere between shock and confusion. Next, I continued pulling out more papers. These are records of the financial transactions I've completed in the past month. You'll note the portfolio rebalancing that increased my returns by 3%. The refinancing of the beach house that will save approximately $42,000 over the loan term, and the establishment of a charitable remainder trust that provides significant tax advantages while ensuring my continued income stream. Robert, the financial expert, looked like he'd been slapped. Caroline's face had drained of color. "Mom," she began, "we didn't mean to suggest." "I know exactly what you meant to suggest." I interrupted, my calm facade finally cracking slightly. "I heard you both 3 weeks ago in this kitchen discussing how to take control of my finances under the pretense that I'm experiencing cognitive decline." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's eyes darted to the manila folder he had placed beside his plate, now obviously out of place. "I remember everything I heard." I continued, my voice steady, despite the emotion building in my chest. "About the guardianship proceedings, about selling the beach house because it's an unnecessary expense. The beach house your father and I bought for our retirement, where he spent his last good days before the cancer took hold." "Mom, we were concerned," Robert protested weakly. "There have been signs. Normal age-appropriate memory lapses that you seized upon and exaggerated." I corrected him. "Did either of you at any point consider simply talking to me about your concerns, asking me if I needed help, rather than conspiring to legally strip me of my autonomy?" They looked genuinely ashamed now, which gave me a small measure of satisfaction. "But that's not the worst part," I went on. "The worst is discovering that my children see me primarily as a collection of assets to be managed, rather than as a person with dignity and rights." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "That's not true, Mom. Isn't it?" I pulled out the small digital recorder from my cardigan pocket. "Let's review the evidence." I pressed play, and Robert's voice filled the dining room. "Once we have control of the finances, we can access her retirement accounts to fund the expansion. It would be a loan, of course." Caroline gasped. I stopped the recording. "You've been struggling financially since the divorce settlement, haven't you, Robert?" I asked gently. "And Caroline, your business expansion hasn't been going as planned. The community living suggestions weren't about my welfare at all. They were about freeing up my assets for your use." Robert looked down at his hands. "It wasn't like that." "Not entirely. We were worried about you, but yes, I've had some difficulties. The timing of asking for help just never seemed right." "So instead, you decided to take control without asking." Caroline was openly crying now. "We made a terrible mistake, Mom. I'm so sorry." I let the moment stretch out, feeling the weight of their betrayal, but also a surprising lightness. The truth, however painful, was now in the open. "I won't pretend this hasn't deeply hurt me," I finally said. "But I'm also not willing to throw away our relationship, so here's what's going to happen." I outlined the new reality for them, the irrevocable trust that now held most of my assets, protecting them from any future attempts at control. The specified conditions under which they could receive financial assistance, legitimate need transparency, and proper documentation. The requirement that any discussions about my cognitive health include me and my doctors. And finally, I concluded, I expect an attitude of respect. I am not a doddering old woman to be managed. I am your mother, a retired psychology professor with expertise in cognitive development, and a woman who is perfectly capable of making her own decisions. The conversation continued for hours. Painful but necessary. Robert admitted that his divorce had left him financially strapped, with alimony payments and a new mortgage straining his resources. Caroline confessed that her business expansion had been built on risky loans that were now coming due. Both had seen my assets as a potential solution, but had convinced themselves that their concerns about my cognition were legitimate. By the time they left that evening, we had reached a fragile truce. I had agreed to consider helping them financially, but as loans with proper documentation, not as handouts or through manipulation. They had agreed to respect my autonomy and approach future concerns directly. After they drove away, I sat alone in my living room, emotionally exhausted, but oddly empowered. I had faced a betrayal I never expected and had emerged with my dignity and independence intact. In the weeks that followed, I took additional steps to secure my future. I joined a support group for older adults, navigating family dynamics, where I discovered my experience was far from unique. I formalized my friendship with Emma into a co-housing arrangement, selling my two-large home, and together purchasing a spacious duplex that provided both independence and proximity to a trusted ally. I established a genuine scholarship fund at the university, though much smaller than the one I had fabricated in my decoy diary. Robert and Caroline, to their credit, seemed genuinely committed to repairing our relationship. They were more transparent about their financial challenges, and I found appropriate ways to help without compromising my security. Robert accepted a loan to settle his most pressing debts with a formal repayment plan. We both signed. I invested in Caroline's business expansion as a silent partner with clearly defined terms, turning what could have been exploitation into a legitimate family venture. 6 months after the confrontation, we gathered for Christmas at my new home. As we sat around the fire opening gifts, Caroline handed me a small, heavy package. "This is from both of us," she said, an unusual seriousness in her expression. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with the inscription on the first page, "For our mother, whose wisdom and strength we failed to honor. May this book hold the stories and memories you choose to share in your own words in your own time, with love and profound respect." I looked up to find both my children watching me intently, vulnerability evident in their faces. "We wanted you to know," Robert said quietly, "that we've been doing a lot of thinking about what happened. About how quickly we jumped to conclusions based on cultural stereotypes about aging that we should have known better than to perpetuate. Especially given your academic background," Caroline added. "You literally taught courses on cognitive development across the lifespan, and still we bought into the most simplistic narrative about age-related decline." I ran my fingers over the journal's soft leather cover, touched by the gesture, but also reminded of the hard lessons we had all learned. "Thank you," I said simply. "I accept this gift and what it represents, but more important than recording my memories is ensuring that I can continue to make them on my own terms." Later that evening, after everyone had left and Emma and I were cleaning up, she asked me if I thought the reconciliation was genuine. "I believe they're sincere in their regret," I replied after consideration. "Whether that translates to lasting change remains to be seen, but I'm no longer vulnerable to their good intentions going awry." "You handled it masterfully," Emma said, "using your expertise in psychology to anticipate their moves and protect yourself while still leaving room for redemption." I smiled, thinking of the irony. They thought my age was my weakness when in fact it's my greatest strength. Decades of studying human behavior, of observing family dynamics, of understanding the complex interplay between cognition and emotion. All of that informed how I responded. Not to mention the wisdom that comes from living through disappointments before. Emma added exactly. This wasn't my first betrayal, just my most unexpected. I thought of professional rivalries, friendships that had soured the occasional student who had attempted to manipulate grades. Each difficulty teaches you something if you're paying attention. The new year brought new developments. I was invited to give a guest lecture at my former university on the psychology of aging, specifically addressing the intersection of cognitive changes and family dynamics. The experience of using my personal story, anonymized of course to educate future psychologists, was profoundly satisfying. Robert's financial situation, stabilized, and he began making regular loan repayments, each one seemingly accompanied by an increased degree of respect in his interactions with me. Caroline's business expansion succeeded beyond expectations, and she made a point of crediting my investment and guidance in her industry interviews. But perhaps the most significant change was in me. The betrayal, painful as it was, had forced me to reevaluate how I presented myself to the world. Had I, without realizing it, been playing into stereotypes of the sweet, slightly doddering elderly woman? Had I been downplaying my intelligence and capability to avoid intimidating others or appearing difficult? I recognized that in subtle ways I had indeed been complicit in how others perceived me. After Harold died, I had unconsciously adopted a more tentative persona, perhaps seeking protection in appearing less formidable. Now I deliberately reclaimed my authority in family gatherings, community meetings, even casual interactions at shops and restaurants. The results were immediate and illuminating. When I spoke with confidence, people listened. When I corrected misconceptions directly, rather than gently, they adjusted their behavior. When I demonstrated expertise rather than demurring, they sought my input on future decisions. 1 year after overhearing that devastating conversation in my kitchen, I hosted a dinner party for my 70th third birthday. Emma was there along with colleagues from the university, friends from my support group, and yes, Robert and Caroline with their families. As we gathered around the table in the comfortable dining room of my new home, my independence intact, my finances secure, I raised my glass for a toast to memory. I said, looking directly at my children who met my gaze steadily, which is neither perfect at 20 nor necessarily compromised at 70, to the wisdom that comes from experiencing life's betrayals and recoveries, and to the privilege of aging with dignity, autonomy, and the support of those who truly respect us. The glasses clinked, and in that moment I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for too long. My children had attempted to take control under the guise of concern, but in doing so, they had inadvertently given me something precious, a renewed determination to live my later years on my own terms, with full awareness of both my capabilities and my rights. They had whispered that Mom was getting forgetful, that they should control her finances before she made a serious mistake. But I had remembered everything I heard, and more importantly, everything I knew about standing up for myself. The greatest mistake, as it turned out, had been theirs. Not in having concerns, but in how they chose to address them. And in the painful process of correcting that mistake, we had all learned valuable lessons about aging, respect, and the enduring complexity of family bonds. As I looked around the table at the faces of those I loved, including my imperfect, forgiven children, I felt grateful for the difficult journey that had brought us here. Not because the betrayal had been warranted, but because overcoming it had made me stronger, wiser, and more authentically myself than I had been in years. Sometimes I reflected the greatest gift of aging isn't the wisdom that accumulates naturally over time, but the wisdom forged in fire when life tests you in ways you never anticipated. At 73, I had been tested and had emerged not diminished but enhanced, not controlled but more in control than ever before. And that was worth remembering indeed.